I used to think that I was a plot-driven reader, that I needed twists and tensions to keep me engaged in a book, especially with literary fiction, which at times can feel quite abstract. But when I look back on the books that stayed with me, I realised something. These books weren't staying with me necessarily because of the plot, but they were staying with me because of the characters and what they went through and the people they became at the end of the book. And I think that's why over the last 2 years, my channel has really focused on deep, intentional reading, particularly literary and historical fiction. I've really gravitated towards stories that reward slowness and emotional nuance. Stories of flawed characters navigating an internal transformation, where someone begins in one emotional place and ends in a completely different place, feels really meaningful. So today I want to share 6 character-driven novels that I wholeheartedly recommend. Daphne du Maurier is the queen of psychological tension, and I could have included any of her books on this list. But what makes Rebecca so powerful for me isn't just that it's a gothic suspense novel, but it's also a study of identity and insecurity. So in Rebecca, a young woman marries a very wealthy widower and they move to his country estate Manderley, only to discover that the presence of his late wife Rebecca dominates every corner of the house. What's so striking about Rebecca is that our narrator and this second wife is never given a name other than becoming the new Mrs. De Winter. We don't know her first name, but even though she is now Mrs. De Winter, it's clear that she has not inherited any of Rebecca's confidence and charisma, and in fact, in many ways is the opposite of who Rebecca is. Her identity is very unstable from the beginning of the book, and after she steps into this role as Mrs. De Winter, she becomes defined not only by her marriage, but also by who Rebecca was and the constant comparison that she continues to get to her. Her identity is unstable from the beginning, and with du Maurier denying her a name, it's like she has disappeared into this new role. She's painfully insecure, constantly being compared by other people and by herself to Rebecca, and trying to measure up to a woman who is not just dead, but becoming a little mythic. So this isn't just a mystery novel about what happened to Rebecca. It's also a book about identity, about what happens when you build your life in the shadow of someone else, and whether you can reclaim yourself. And for me, I can't think of another book that portrays that insecurity in such a sharp way as this one does. While Rebecca explores a loss of identity in marriage, this next book is different, where it explores loneliness later in life, and that is Rare Singles by Benjamin Myers. Benjamin Myers is one of my favourite authors. While his books shift in terms of themes and even genres, they are always deeply rooted in people. He writes about vulnerability and longing and what makes us human. Rare Singles follows Bucky Bronco, who was a former soul singer who had a very brief moment of success in his youth. Years later, he receives an invitation to perform at a festival in England, where he seems to have acquired quite a devoted following to his very short career. When we meet Bucky, he is grieving his wife, he is isolated, he is very downtrodden, he feels physically fragile and emotionally withdrawn, and he's resigned that the rest of his life will be very small and contained. He's been living in a bit of an emotional limbo since his wife died, although we do find that that limbo has continued on from before that as well. On the surface, it sounds like a comeback story, but this novel isn't about revival or fame. It's really about confronting a version of yourself that once existed and finding out whether you can step back into those shoes, and if that person still has a place in your present. And what makes this book even more moving is that the connection is shared. There is a woman who invites Bucky to England, and she is changed by their friendship. Both characters are quietly reshaped just by being seen. For me, this is a novel about dignity, about friendship, and about allowing yourself even later in life to step back into the world. Bucky feels completely human. He is real, tender, flawed, but spending time with him is the true gift of this book. Long Island by Colm Tóibín. Long Island is the long-awaited sequel to Brooklyn And Brooklyn is also a wonderful character-driven book. But while Brooklyn is about becoming, I feel that Long Island is most definitely about consequence. It's quieter, it's more inward, and it's very reflective. In Long Island, we return to Eilish long after Brooklyn has finished. It's about 2 decades later. She's settled into her life as a wife and a mother in Long Island, but then a revelation about her marriage disrupts this carefully structured life she's built. Eilish is emotionally distant. She is very restrained and conflict avoiding. She has spent years fitting into this new life of hers in America, but she still feels like an outsider. And this novel really explores what happens when repression can no longer hold, when the silence that once felt protective in relationships becomes suffocating. And Eilish is forced not just to confront her marriage, but also the decisions that she's made and the compromises. It becomes a story of consequence about how the internal choices we make form the life that we have. And it asks whether it's ever too late to really reconsider who you actually are. Something I've noticed while talking about these first few books is that none of them really rely on big twists to keep you engaged. In Rebecca, it's the insecurity that pulls you forward. In Rare Singles, it is about watching Bucky slowly return to himself. And in Long Island, it's definitely about the tension about what is not being said. And I think that's what I respond to. It's the quiet pressure that starts to build up inside a character. And the moment when something small shifts and you realize they are not the same person they were at the start of the book, either for good or for bad. That kind of change requires attention, and it's really rewarding when you spend time quietly and slowly reading a book that you get to see those things unfold. And that's why this next book feels like such a continuation, and that is Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens by Shankari Chandran. Chai Time is layered and multi-generational, but at its heart, it's about identity and belonging. I read it as a buddy read with a friend of mine, and it was such a good experience that we were able to talk with each other as we read it. It was a book that won the Miles Franklin Literary Award in 2023, so it came with a lot of weight behind it. The cover and the title make it sound cozy, but this is a book that deals with some heavy themes around race, trauma, and belonging. It's set in a nursing home in Sydney called Cinnamon Gardens, and it follows the residents and the workers of this nursing home as the past and the present begin to collide. There's a number of perspectives in this book, but at its core is a woman named Anjali, and she is the daughter of immigrants who came to Australia in the 80s and started the Cinnamon Gardens nursing home. And in this book, she's forced to confront the stories that she has told and that she has been told. And around her, others are also reckoning with long silences. It's a story about inherited identity and about how stories can shape us across generations. The shifts are quiet but seismic in this book. It manages to say a lot without being overbearing with some of the themes that it has within it, because the characters are central to the story, and it lingers because it asks who we are when we finally tell the truth. If Chai Time explores identity across generations, Drift explores one isolated life on the Welsh coastline. Drift is very lyrical and atmospheric. There are 2 points of view in this book from very different worlds which collide during a storm. At the centre of the story is a woman named Neffin. She's emotionally closed off and self-contained, and metaphorically and literally living on the edge of her community. She exists in this suspended solitude, and when a man named Hamza is brought into her life through this storm, it unsettles the safety of her isolation, and it really makes her evolve in a way that she's never had to before. So the novel really explores what happens when distance stops protecting you. It's about vulnerability, it's about letting people in. And if there's an example of someone who starts the book one way and ends a completely different way, it is most definitely Drift. There are touches of magical realism, but it is still a very grounded book. The real movement is internal, as Neffin goes towards this real change through connection. And while Drift is intimate and atmospheric, the last book I want to recommend, The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard, widens the lens, but it keeps the tension internal. The Other Valley really surprised me. I picked it up for speculative fiction, but what I found was a beautiful character-driven book about moral responsibility. It's set in a town that is bordered by other towns that are its past and its future. And travel across these timelines is tightly controlled, and our main character, Odile, is a teenage girl who one day sees something she shouldn't have. Odile is awkward and observant, and she is ambitious. She wants to be one day holding a position of authority as a person who decides when someone can and cannot cross into other towns. After witnessing something that she shouldn't have seen, Odile is torn between loyalty and ambition and that burden of knowledge. This isn't really a book about time travel, and the author doesn't spend a lot of time telling you why the world is this way, it just is. This allows you to dial in to what the story is really about, which is secrecy and responsibility and the human cost of choice. All of this tension lives inside of Odile, which makes it such an interesting page-turning read. So across all 6 of these books, the tension doesn't come from plot alone, it lives within the characters. It comes from people and their insecurity and their compromise and their choices, from loneliness and from their silence. I used to think that I needed more momentum to keep me engaged in a book, but the longer I think about it, the more I realize that these character-driven novels really speak to me, and they're the ones that stay with me the longest. When a character begins in one place but ends in another, even if it's a subtle difference, it's still meaningful. And that change isn't always a happy one. Sometimes transformation comes at a cost. And I think that's part of the reason why I like to reread books, because even though the stories haven't changed, who I am has changed, and it allows me to pick up different things as I read it again and again. And if that idea resonates with you, I did make a video about why I reread my books, and I will leave that linked here. So I'd love to know, do you consider yourself to be more drawn to books that are plot-driven or character-driven, or a combination of the both? And if you have a favourite novel where the drama happens inside the characters, I'd love to know that too. I'm always looking for more books that explore that quiet transformation. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful week of reading ahead, and I'll speak with you soon. Bye.